Kristen Magaletti. I'm a K-12 educator and an Adobe Master Teacher and Education Leader. I'm so happy to speak with you today on creating engaging, creative curriculum that can work for distance, hybrid, or in-person classrooms. The essential question for today is, how can we create a classroom culture that ignites curiosity and creates space for each and every student to feel seen, heard, and valued? So as we explore and reconsider our curriculum design and instruction, it is vital to consider who our students are at the center of all this. So as we approach our design, we have to question, is our learning and our curriculum accessible to all learners in our classroom? Is it culturally responsive? Is it equitable? One example that I have of this is when I was a teacher in the New York City Department of Education. I taught in the Bronx for 8 years, and I had many students who were English language learners. One day, my students came to me very distraught. They had an assignment that sounded creative. The questions were higher order, and yet it fell flat. The question that my students were asked to demonstrate their learning in another class was, pack your bags. You're headed on a trip to the airport. What will you bring? Use your imagination to demonstrate what you know. My students, most of them, had never stepped foot in an airport. So rather than come from a place of excitement and confidence, many of my students were embarrassed and felt like they didn't know where to begin, and they froze. And I wondered, had this question been more applicable to their lives, perhaps their results might have looked really, really different. So when we are creating design for kids in distance learning or in person, it's vital to know who these kids are as we're trying to assess where they are. Also, it's really important for us not to make assumptions about what our kids are experiencing at home and how they might be the same or different from when we knew them in school. As a mom, I saw two vastly different experiences for my own children. I had one son who didn't really like school, who was a little bit socially anxious, live his best life at home. He loved the flexibility of being able to get a snack whenever he wanted, to get a hug from mom. He thrived in this environment. Yet my older son had a very different experience where I saw him slowly having a more challenging time managing the inundation of workload, and he felt a sense of isolation over time that many students felt in this space, and many teachers felt as well. So when we are creating curriculum, it's really important that we continue to find engaging ways to keep kids engaged and to create some level of excitement to keep them passionate about learning about whatever it is that you're teaching in your classes. Also, as we make this shift towards creative demonstrations of learning, something that I hear frequently is a concern about a loss of rigor. So I included this quote by Jay McTighe, one of the co-authors of Understanding by Design, which is a book on framework for curriculum and design and instruction, that talks about the ability of challenge to be reflected in a student's ability to challenge increasingly complex tasks and projects. So all of us now find ourselves in 2020 in a world that we could have never imagined. And when our students graduate and enter the workforce, they're going to see a world that is unpredictable. So we need to shift how we're teaching them to include things that push for next generation, next century learning, such as creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and communication. Students need to be able to transfer their learning and demonstrate what they know in a modality that's meaningful to them, that shows an accurate depiction of where they are at a developmentally appropriate level. And the last slide I want to leave you with before we jump into some examples is the importance of giving students the chance to have creative wins. So when you give the student a chance to express themselves creatively, it gives students this self of self-efficacy or a personal belief in their capability to organize and execute courses of action. So as students maybe enter a room, we have to think about the message that our assessment sometimes sends students about the way that mastery works. So if I were to walk into a math class and take a test and get a C minus, the experience of so many students is they believe is they are that student in math. They are just not that great in math, and that's it, right? But if we give students the opportunity to get feedback, to iterate, to grow, and to show what they know in a creative way, this can be really transformative for kids as they get these small creative wins that makes them more confident, that they feel like they can challenge something more academically challenging. So I am a career history teacher, so content to me is still important. I think that students need to understand causality and patterns of thinking to really understand what to search and how to think about systems in our world. But the importance here is a shift towards being skills focused rather than something that is Googleable or that kids can ask Alexa the answers to, because when given the chance, they'll do it every time, as many of us saw at home. So a lot of educators really are excited to work this way, but they're overwhelmed in this new space and they don't know where to begin. So this is why I'm such a fan of the Adobe Education Exchange, because while a lot of places focus on tools and are tool-centric, this is a place that really shows how Adobe can be used as a means to amplify pedagogy and strong teaching rather than the reverse. So in this first lesson that I used was from a collaboration between Khan and Create and Adobe. And on the Khan and Create lessons, Adobe took the content that is used by so many people throughout the world from the Khan Academy and embedded this information in their lessons and thought about how students might be able to transfer and demonstrate what they know in a creative way. Check out one of the samples for my students that was part of this lesson.
Here's my mini project about linear perspective. Brunelleschi showed that linear perspective could be used to make designs more realistic and three-dimensional. He got this idea from ancient Greece and Rome. Here's my version of a linear perspective. I made an X across my page and a dot in the middle. This was my vanishing point. Then I made floorboards on a diagonal to match the X that meets in the middle. I also added windows and a door for more perspective. Here are more examples of linear perspective that I found in photographs in the world around me. When you think about it, art is everywhere. It all just depends on your perspective.
So notice in that student demonstration that this student was able to demonstrate an understanding of Brunelleschi's linear perspective. They were able to transfer that learning by creating a visual, and then they were also able to extend that thinking by creating a video using a user-friendly tool in Adobe Spark to create a demonstration of learning where they then also thought about how linear perspective shapes the world around them. So in addition to being a strong demonstration of learning, notice that perhaps there's a fifth key that we should consider in character learning, and that students are able to now see their world through new eyes. And one of the things that's most meaningful to me is that if I want my students to leave my classroom as curious and lifelong learners, I need to really develop and facilitate that in my classroom so that they look at the world around them through that curious, inquisitive lens. So this lesson blends all of that pedagogy into a really user-friendly lesson. The lesson that is embedded here that you can check at the end of this presentation for Khan and Create is all student-facing for this lesson. This next lesson is from the Adobe and Better lesson collaboration. And the difference with these lessons is that there's also a teacher-facing side of this in addition to the student-facing lesson. So a teacher can really have a deeper understanding and explanation of the pedagogy in a very quick overview with student-friendly, user-friendly lessons that can be distributed immediately to students if they want. But what I think is so great about these lessons is that these lessons are intended not only to spark student curiosity, but to spark teacher curiosity. So while I hope that many teachers find this useful, what is so special about these lessons is that as you consider that human-centered design and the students who are in front of you, perhaps there's a piece of this that you can pull and reimagine for your classroom. So for this lesson, why it stands out as a favorite to me is because as a teenager myself, times are different, right? But I used to listen to music in my classroom, in my bedroom frequently, and I can remember specific moments in my life and in music that I was listening to at that time. So thinking of that and how powerful music is to teenagers, I wanted to make a connection to having kids think more curiously and critically of the music they listen to and how it has been used as an avenue for shaping public opinion and encouraging civic engagement and discourse throughout history. So in this student sample, students were asked to follow a thread of history, looking at that essential question, to talk about different movements of history and how it related to historical movements. For my students lived about 10 miles. I now live in South Florida, and we are about 10 miles from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Parkland. So many of my students chose to talk about March for Our Lives. So as a teacher, what's so great about this is that as we're trying to get a little glimpse into who students are, we can allow them to have an open-ended inquiry assignment where they're able to look at either music of their choice or music within a specific era that speaks to them to talk about the historical content of that period. So they're taking that critical thinking skill first and then going back to loop in that content. This next lesson was another Adobe Better lesson collaboration that was used with creation of Adobe Acrobat Pro. So in this strategy, students engage in the authentic work of professional historians by considering their own perspectives and insights as they define, interpret, and question the past by exploring primary source documents. So in history, while we are teaching different time periods, one of the essential understandings that many history teachers have is for students to learn how to think like historians. And so this lesson, as you go through this sample, students are walked through the process of specific annotation strategies to use called It Says, I Say, and So, and how to mark up their text in Adobe Acrobat. They're also walked through how to create questions that spark higher order thinking and discussion and curiosity using frameworks that are familiar to many teachers. And in doing so, at the end of this lesson, students are encouraged to use the questions that they generated to possibly follow up with an activity where they have a Socratic seminar, a class discussion, or they use that prompt to create a thesis statement. So you're taking something where a student is interpreting history as a historian, and kids are using and sparking that curiosity to create higher order questions that they can then apply to something that would be considered academically rigorous in generating a research paper or having a discussion or creating a video portfolio or podcast. So the follow-up to this lesson is really endless in its ability to be applied to so many different follow-up tasks. But this is a great starting point to think about how we might be able to use a tool like Adobe Acrobat, which previously I had just used for PDF, in its really engaging and exciting way. Adobe Acrobat DC also has possibilities for students to collaboratively annotate documents. So as we're using this tool, we can also think about what other literacy skills we want to apply to this. Do we want to have kids do a double entry journal or have kids respond to each other's annotations? And so by trying one of these strategies, this will open doors to so many other possibilities for how we use this in our classrooms. And this isn't just applicable to history, but creating questions and going back and looking at our observations is something that is integral to so many content areas. This last strategy is something that I think is really exciting in that it has students develop media literacy by looking at different strategies used in political campaigns throughout time. So the reason I wanted to show you this is that I use Adobe Spark Page as a means to curate research for my students. So not only can this be a tool for students to demonstrate what they know, but I wanted a space where students could see the different strategies that are used in political advertisements and a place where they could sample different ads. So it's a multimedia curation here, and students are able to see examples embedded in this activity. So when I was creating this, I was really mindful not to have a political slant because that is not what I'm assessing here. I'm assessing for students to be able to have a critical lens of the political campaigning that they see to understand how advertisements are made. So in this sample, students were using the information that they pulled in this page and creating a sample where they were pretending that they were running for office, and they created a video using Adobe Spark Video. So this is, again, a really user-friendly tool. And when we think about creating these videos and we think about accessibility, if students don't have access to a video camera, students might be able to pull in images and video clips under the Creative Commons license. So you can take this activity and deepen digital citizenship by teaching kids how to do this, so that they're also building their digital fluency and their ability to communicate effectively with an authentic audience. Take a look.
I'm Isabella Jones, and I approve this message. When we started the school year in 2019 to 2020, no one could have predicted what the end of the school year would have looked like. Our current school government ran on a platform for a world that they couldn't even imagine. At first, distance learning and being at home seemed really cool, but as quarantine went on and conditions worsened, our time and challenges only seemed to grow.
So I won't show you the whole clip, but I wanted you to see how this was able to pull together clips that were not taken with a video camera, but were found in a Creative Commons licensing space. So again, students can really demonstrate these powerful demonstrations of learning with very user-friendly tools. And what is so wonderful about the Adobe Better Lesson collaboration is that Spark might be the place where you get started, but there are hundreds of lessons applying tools within Adobe's Creative Cloud. So if you're looking for tools that provide more control for the creator and you want to try Adobe Premiere Pro or Adobe Rush, not only are there tutorials and resources for that, but there are tons of lessons that pull that out. So as you're looking through these resources, if you can think of a way to apply a tool in a different way, there's space to do that. Again, going back to the lesson that I had on political movements and music, in this situation, perhaps as one of the extensions that I have for upward differentiation, students could have created their own music and demonstrated this using a different Adobe tool in a really powerful way to give even more insight into who they are. So the last slide that I want to leave you with for today is this quote, which is my favorite quote from education. So I want you to consider the students who are quiet, who are the divergent thinkers, who perhaps feel othered or marginalized in some way, or who are those round pegs in square holes. When we give them the space to demonstrate what they know in creative ways, and we empower their voices, we enable the world to see their creative and unique genius. I also want to acknowledge that I see your genius. You are here because you want to change. And never forget, though we might be called the crazy ones, those who want to change the world and who are crazy enough to think it are usually the ones who do. Thank you so much for joining me today.